Hey there, thanks for joining us at the Rabbit Hole of Research, where you'll learn a few facts that you can impress your friends with at a party. Hey, welcome back to the Rabbit Hole of Research. We're down here in the basement studio with another exciting episode in our Fantastic Four series. We'll be focusing a little bit on the thing and all things strong, tough skin. As usual, we have the whole crew here. You have me, Joe.
You got Nick.
We've got Nick.
And Georgia.
We've got Georgia. And we have a special guest with us. And per our tradition, we let the guests introduce themselves, please.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Maberry. I'm a New York Times bestselling author in multiple genres. I write horror, science fiction, fantasy, whatever. And also a comic book writer. I wrote for Marvel for a bunch of years, Dark Horse, IDW, doing some freelance projects now. They're a lot of fun. I also edit Weird Tales magazine and keep myself pretty immersed in the pop culture world, which is my home space. It's my comfort zone.
Yeah, awesome. No, it should be fun. Hopefully we can fit right in here with our witty banter at times. I don't know. So.
I do have to say that I've read a lot of your stuff that I did not realize was yours until about a month ago. I was like, I read that. Oh, wait, I know his stuff. It was just...
I get a lot of that from folks at events, too. And that's cool. As long as they're reading the stuff, that's what matters most. But when I was at the world premiere event for the Black Panther Wakanda Forever, I not only were people surprised that I had written anything that became part of that movie, everybody there was surprised I was white. Including Ryan Coogler. Ryan Coogler came up to me at the after party and said, "You're white?" I'm like, I am? Oh my God. He thought I was black. In terms of talking about skin.
There you go. That's a great segue.
Yeah, so usually I have a definition to get us grounded, and I have a list. So I'll do the definition, what is skin? But I do have a special list for Jonathan because I know he likes facts, and he always has posts on social media. If you follow him on all the different flavors of social media, he has tell me something new or something I don't know. So I have a list, and I'll see how many of those facts. But I'll start with the definition to get us started. What is skin? Skin is biological armor. It's a sensor interface, a site of cultural inscription, and a metaphor for identity. It is the most visible and tactile representation of self, and in fiction, a canvas onto which transformation, trauma, and power are projected. So I think that's...
Wow, nicely phrased. I like it.
Yeah, so we were, as I said, talking about the Fantastic Four, and we already had the first episode on the Fantastic Four come out. But just to recap, it's a fictional superhero team by Marvel, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. First appeared in Fantastic Four #1, 1961, Marvel Comics. They were considered Marvel's first superhero team, or the first family, and helped establish the more human, flawed, family-driven style that defined Marvel storytelling. And Ben was one of the members of that team. He was Reed Richards' college roommate and former football star.
Yep.
And Ben he was, after a trip, illegal and or unscripted trip into space, they were bombarded by cosmic rays. Ben got disfigured, and he was given this kind of rocky, orange, scaly skin that was superhuman strength, impenetrable, and had all these kind of nearly impervious to damage and things like that. So, yeah, that's the character.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I do have to say that it is always so interesting seeing him in the comics because they tend to show the strength of his skin. We're considering it skin, yes?
I would consider it skin, yes, as probably the outer layer, the dermis was modified in some way, but
yeah, and it's always so fascinating because I was reading an issue, I'll have to put it in the show notes, where they were pulling him apart, and like you just saw all of his skin. It looked like a gum being pulled, and it was just like, whoa, like the amount of pain that has to be. I'm assuming it's like a scab that would just be like,
yeah. One that's not ready to fall off, but they're trying to pull it, yeah.
Exactly. And then that's what I'm like, oh, it's, fantastic. I love that.
And I always loved when Kirby would show me him getting a really hard impact. One of the ways they would use to emphasize the impact is pieces of rock would be flying off of him.
Yeah.
You know, another character would be blood from a busted nose, but for him, it was always pieces of rock falling off. And that kind of defined how hard he was being hit because he's impervious, but somebody could do that at least to him.
And knock off bits of skin and or his outer structure, which is interesting. And thinking about how that would actually form, I think, Nick, you hit on it with scar tissue was one that immediately came to my mind that as he was bombarded was that now some scarification. And you have this kind of, in terms of scars, you get fibrous tissue that forms as you get the scar. So is that now been modified as DNA? And so you get this kind of overgrowth and then calcification and then almost kind of mineralization there. And that would form this kind of outer exterior. And then as you were just pointing out, Jonathan, that as it gets damaged, bits gets knocked off, but presumably is regenerated. And so that means this is some active process that happens.
And his skin would have to be, his rocky skin would have to be at least porous or something. Otherwise, the skin's the most important breathing apparatus next to our lungs. And so he would need that. And funny, because I've had a conversation about this with Stan Lee years ago at Houston Comic Palooza, I think it was. And a bunch of us were talking about different characters and how somehow the conversation came up as how they would get medical treatment.
Oh,
Ben Grimm
that's right.
Had beautiful white teeth. How? Dentist worked on him. And were those teeth set in gums or were they set in rock? And a couple of us were asked questions of Lee, and we didn't think that far.
I mean, nails, toenails, fingernails. Yeah, I mean, you have all of those external, but besides breathing and pores, you also have tactile sensation. The skin is our communication to our environment. So if you lose that, you lose a major sense. It's almost like being blind or deaf or losing any other senses. So that is something that, I don't know if they cover that in any comic line or.
They touch on it because there are times, even though when especially in the early Fantastic Four comics, he and Johnny were always in a baiting war. They were always trying to run into each other. And sometimes Johnny would try to scorch him and he would run away. He would react to it. So he could feel pain, feel pressure, but his skin, it was like being on the other side of a fireproof garment. You feel the heat. You just don't think they actually burn. So that might be where they were going with it, if they even thought that far. But presuming that he something like that could exist, and the version of it we're seeing in the most recent trailers fits the old Ben Grimm a little more. He's more fluid. He's more flexible. It's less like a rock man trying to move than a man who actually made of malleable rock. And it must be malleable if he's going to reach, lift,
be able to grab things.
You have to be flexible still, and that's part of it. That when this transformation happened.
Yeah, and the flexibility can't just be the subdermal layer.
Yes, that's right.
If he was stretching, you would see gaps.
Right.
So it must be the rock itself, rocky surface that is stretching like an alligator's skin and so on, which looks armored, but it still has a degree of flexibility because otherwise the thing couldn't operate, couldn't swim or anything else.
That's actually a really good point. Like putting it towards like an alligator skin. I wouldn't have even thought of that.
Actually, where I've always gone with the thing's skin because it has to move. And you mentioned that I'm a research or knowledge junkie. I am a knowledge junkie. And when I was a kid, that's what I was trying to figure out. How he did that, where the Hulk got his extra mass from, because Bruce was maybe 150 pounds of the Hulk. So I knew just enough about science, even as a kid, to have questions. And some of those I did get to ask Stan, because I got to know him pretty well the last few years of his life. And also some of the other folks who worked on Fantastic Four. I had conversations with John Byrne about it. Byrne was more of the everything's elastic, just really tough thing. And I mentioned to him I called it crocodile skin, but the same alligator skin, same thing. And he said, that's probably exactly what it's like that, just thicker.
So, a little more durable or calcified in some way. So you would have that, some combination, maybe armadillo scaling also it has some level of flexibility in the way it's joined. And
also he smiles, he laughs, he frowns. All of those require of his muscles and skin.
And the muscle, the muscle control of all, that's just not, you still have to maintain that. That control.
I like that aspect of the thing, of that concept of the thing being more elastic, it makes him more human and also makes him more of a scarified victim of what's going on rather than a transformed into a monster thing. Because he was always about the monster. And he wasn't a monster. He was a victim of a reaction, a mutated skin reaction to something, to cosmic rays.
Right.
It's unfair and sad that he became the ugly one.
I think you hit on a good thing right there, where he does get identified as a monster, and seeing people with different deformities do get, back then people were like, oh, they're either had a curse put on them or something. It was just always, this is a monster.
Yeah. And they were leaning in a little bit to the paranoia that was pretty common in the 50s and 60s. Anyone who wasn't us, that other thing. Plus, it's the beginning of the civil rights era, so you have a lot of it's not us thing. But that's also, again, Kirby and Lee leaning into, just because it looks different doesn't make it not human. I think there was a little bit of that in there too, which they explored with the X-Men and some other things. But I love the fact that Ben Grimm is a good guy, and I hated the fact that in so many of the early comics, he'd be walking on the street maybe with a slouch hat and a collar up. Somebody would see him and would be terrified. First off, by about issue 2, they should know he exists. Lee kept wanting to make the point, and it's funny because the point they were making is what we in the novel trade. It's one of the rookie mistakes of assuming the reader doesn't remember from the last episode the detail laid down, keeps needing to be reinforced. I can understand it in Fantastic Four because it was the first Marvel comic, but they kept it going well into, I think, the 40s, issue 40, and that still regarded as a monster. And I think even I'm Monster, I think, was maybe one of the titles, or This Man, This Monster. That was the title. Yeah. So that he's still trying to get back to being human, because he still has now bought into the people see me as a monster, therefore I am one.
Yeah,
and it's a sad thing for me.
That seemed like some of that storyline, if we think about just his identity, that he was this sweet, caring person, but then he had this external kind of, it was his play, maybe oversimplification of these traits that he had, and you get that. And you brought up, just a segue a little bit to the civil rights movement thing, is Luke Cage then who came out, who also then was given tough skin under different circumstances, this coerced experimental activity, and then the warden or police officer screwed with the instrumentation, and then he was given the super strong, literally impenetrable kind of skin. So this very tough skin. And so that was a very different. So he was very normal on the outside, but society had seen him as a monster. So it's this very...
And also, do you guys know who John Lewis was, right?
Yes.
So he did a comic called The March for IDW.
That's right.
Right.
We did a signing together at Comic-Con one year. We were talking, and Luke Cage was, I think, just coming on TV at the time, more around the Luke Cage era on Netflix. And we were talking, and his theory on the Luke Cage having the orange skin is that black people had to be so bulletproof in terms of their reactions to what is being said, that what they did to Luke, what Luke represented was, no matter what you say, you can't hurt me. That kind of an approach. That was at least John Lewis's take. And valid one too.
Yeah. No, right.
But again, I don't know if the creators had that specifically in mind.
Right.
It's like with George Romero in Night of the Living Dead. I just want to jump a second. Because in Night of the Living Dead, you had a black man who was the only strong, intelligent character.
Right.
And all the reviewers said, my God, this was this incredible civil rights movie. It's about racism. It wasn't. He was the only good actor who auditioned.
Yeah.
Right.
Saw those reactions. And from then on, leaned into that as the interpretation of even that first movie.
Wow.
So I would agree, Marvel may be retconning its own design aesthetic when they gave some of these characters these qualities. I think they may, I'm hoping at least, on some subliminal level, they were trying to make that kind of equitable statement about just because we are different does not mean we are bad or wrong or evil or monsters or anything. And Marvel had the more progressive vibe than DC anyway. So I think that may have been an ingredient in the soup, at least.
Yeah. No, I think I totally agree with that and see that from that perspective, especially growing up in America as a person of color, a black man, that it is something that you go out in the world and you have to be as good or better than your white counterparts at times. And sometimes you're the only. And so then you have that weight going out into the world. So that is also both. Luke Cage's character was a large man, almost a John Henry kind of figure. So it wasn't like they took a skinny black man and said, "Okay, you're now with the super skin." He was
Right.
he was an
Intimidating
yes,
figure.
that's right, force. So that
And it
was
was
also
literally having tough skin,
literally tough skin,
like
and
being able to deal with.
right, and skin, and touch upon it a little bit, but enslaved people were used in experiments on skin,
Yeah.
and particularly testing of thick skin. So there was this theory that these enslaved people didn't feel pain because they had thicker hides like animals. And so you had a number of slave owners who would do these experiments, and torturous experiments, and go through it. So that was it. And those myths persist even today, that with pain medication and thing, that black people don't need as much or can tolerate more pain because of these kind of racist ideals that were put out.
And that have continued.
That has continued. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a poem that Maya Angelou read at Temple University years ago, and one of the lines in it, and I've tried to find this online, is, "Just because I survived being whipped didn't mean I liked it."
Yeah.
And that kind of speaks a little bit to this. Just because they survived the things that people put them through didn't mean they were invulnerable. It meant they were committed to survival. It should have been admired rather than looked at as a freak of nature thing. But
No, definitely. Yep. No.
I just want to say one more thing about Fantastic Four. I don't know if you know this story, Joe, but that comic, first of all, was my favorite comic. And if this was the very first comic I ever bought.
Wow. There it is.
Oh, damn.
Oh, wow.
I bought that when I was a kid. I was 9 years old.
Wow.
But the thing about Fantastic Four is my background had a lot to do with skin in this regard. My father, who was a terrible human being, ran the local chapter of the KKK. So I grew up in a household dominated by racism in a neighborhood in Philadelphia that was known as White Town, USA. That was the nickname of the neighborhood. It's still rated as the worst neighborhood in Philadelphia. You think it's Yay team. And it was...
Which neighborhood did you grow up in? Kensington. Okay. I was going to try to guess, but I didn't.
Yeah, never been there. If a black family would move in the neighborhood, one house would be firebombed, and that is not a good terrible place. So when in issue, was it 52 that Black Panther showed up? When that character, because I've been, even though this was the first, Fantastic 466 was the first comic I bought, I've been reading comics since I was a little kid. My brother gave me all his comics before I went off to Vietnam. So I had Fantastic Four going back to issue 2.
Wow.
And issue 52 of Fantastic Four introduced a black character who was nobody's sidekick. He was not comic relief. He was not a star. He was the king of his own nation. He was a scientist, and he was a superhero. And of course, my father would see that comic, he'd rip it up. And I would always rebuy them. And then later on in 7th grade, I actually went to my middle school librarian and brought one of the comics in and said, my father, she knew who my father was, everybody did. My father hates this comic. I don't really know why, because I hadn't met any people of color up until 7th grade. His name was Whit. And she looked at the issue and said, that particular issue is about apartheid. I'm like, what is that? And she explained it, and she said, do you know about the Jim Crow laws? I'm like, no. And she said, do you know who Martin Luther King was? I said, yeah, he was this. And unfortunately, I used a racial epithet because that's what we were trained to use. I said, he was a bad guy who was killed. My father had it through a party. And she said, sit down. And for 2.5 hours, she gave me a crash course in what intolerance and racism are all about. And the issue that I brought in was interesting because it speaks to the topic here about skin. It was the issue where T'Challa is arrested in the Marvel Universe version of South Africa. I forget what they used to call it in the comics. But he was arrested. He was in prison. And Ben and Johnny go to break him out. Ben is orange-brown. Johnny, when is red. A brown man and a red man help a black man out of a prison. That is not an accident. It flew nowhere in sight.
Yeah.
It flew right over the head of a lot of people. But my librarian, she said, this is like very clear. This is about the races who have to stick together because they have a greater enemy, but they're still people. And they should be regarded based on their actions and content of their soul or quality of soul. But it was so interesting that they had, I think it was Roy Thomas maybe wrote that episode over that issue, but it was so clear, brown, red, and black. Three different skin tones that were really politically charged at the time with that 1971 or so.
Yeah.
And they could float it by people in a comic because you could talk about different skin colors, different skin types in comics because they're superheroes or
Right.
supervillains.
Right.
Right.
But there was a percentage of the fan base that was getting it.
Yeah, that's good.
And I got a hint of it there. And from then on, my views and my father's views split, just say on an epic level.
Wow.
Yes. No. That's,
So I have to ask, how did he know that you wrote for Black Panther and all this?
No, he died before that.
Okay.
I had started studying martial arts on the sly when I was sick because it was a very bad household to grow up in. My 4 sisters and I were pretty badly abused. And when I was 14, he and I had an app. We had a fight. And from that point on, he just say there were no more meetings of the KKK in our house, and he did not make any statements or put his hands on anyone. But he did not live long enough to see my Marvel Comics days. So I'm hoping that he is in his grave spitting it about tomorrow. Not only did I write Black Panther, I wrote Black Panther with the female lead. So I wrote a feminist Black Panther.
Wow.
His bones have probably exploded. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
That is so interesting to hear. Like, that is your upbringing, like being able to come from that kind of background to writing some fantastic stories about minority leads. That's so
because of that story, I got the job at Marvel for this particular thing because Reggie Hudlin, who'd been writing Black Panther, I had done a Marvel Zombies. I did a Punisher and Wolverine thing for Marvel by that point. And Reggie was thinking of stepping down. He had been the writer for Black Panther, and they were looking for someone to replace him. And the assumption was he would pick a black writer, which makes perfect sense. But he heard me talk on the radio talking about my childhood and how the Black Panther was the pivotal moment where my life began splitting away from my father's racism. So he went to bat for me at Marvel and got me the gig. And also because I had spent 35 years of my adult life teaching women self-defense, he decided to give me an extra little bonus. He said, look, the last 6 issues of my run, we're going to turn Shuri into the Panther. Why don't you come and ghost write that storyline? I'll do the major storyline, but you do the Shuri storyline. So you'll be the first person to put her in the armor, and then you'll pick up the comic after that. That's what we did. And,
Wow. It's me.
and I'm still, Reggie was also at the Black Panther Wakanda Forever, and we were joking. He said, if you hadn't done that radio interview, a lot of this wouldn't be happening right now, but it was so surreal.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
it. So I do want to touch on one of your characters who has skin involved as part of their storyline, and that's Monk. And that
Yeah.
character, you had to know that was coming.
Actually, I didn't, but I'm glad you brought up.
Yeah.
Monk is
Yeah.
one of my favorite characters of all.
And
I love him so much. Flips is like one of my all-time favorite novels.
yes, Georgia she had quotes
that's
from your
probably
book
why I
written
can't-
on our chalkboard in our kitchen. And she said, I already read your book, and I've been reading your stuff for a while. And Georgia picked up that book because it was just laying in the house. And then she was like, did you read this line? Like, I read the whole book. Yes, I know that.
Monk appears in 2 other novels and in a short story collection. He's in
Yep.
Ink
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
and in
Sure.
Burn to Shine, the latest Joe Ledger book.
if you can see,
Yeah.
they geeked out
Oh,
and had
yeah, right.
all
We
your.
have a few.
And of course, Monk Addison,
That's right, yeah.
But he started off as a comic book character,
Oh,
actually.
oh wow.
Oh,
At one point, IDW was going to do a shared horror universe, kind of like the DC and the
Right,
Marvel.
right.
They wanted to do a shared. So it was going to be Steve Niles, Joe Hill, myself, and 1 or 2 other guys. We were going to create monsters that lived in the same world, but were also like heroic monsters. And we were all ready to go. And then there was a management change at Marvel, at the IDW rather, it never happened. So I took the character back and I decided to make a short story out of him. And so it tended to be a one-off. But as soon as I started writing, I just loved the concept of someone who it's haunted by what he does and by the faces of dead people on his skin, and their ghosts never leave him.
Yeah.
We're getting a little bit of interest for film. Vin Diesel's reading ink right now.
Yeah,
Oh.
that would be incredible. I can totally see it.
that's really
Um,
cool.
And to folks who are listening, you should go read we'll put in the show notes one of the many stories that Monk is in, but he's a private investigator. Yeah.
Brenda. He's a former special ops soldier who then became a private military contractor, burned out, went on the Pilgrim's Road to find who he was. And he found out, like, he got a tattoo at one point, and he realized that when the tattoo was completed, it was a face of someone. He was able to then relive their death. And there was a little girl that was murdered, and he is able to not only relive her death, but see what she saw when she was dying, which gave him clues to be able to go out and find the killers. And that became his road to, it's hard to call it salvation because he isn't going out killing people, but at the same point, he's doing something that is a redemption story, not a religious story, but a redemption. And he has faces all over him of all these murder victims. And when the tattoo is completed, he relieves the death, goes and finds the killer. And if he can stop this person, not as revenge, but to prevent the person from doing more killing, and he takes the guy off the board, but the ghost that kind of hired him to do this is always with him. So he's surrounded by all the ghosts of the people that were murdered and he killed their killers, but they're always with him, like 24/7. And it's a tough life, but he's one of my favorite characters. There's a lot of the Thing in him, in that with the Thing, you always know where his moral compass is pointing. He's not a conflicted character. He is not really a gray area character. Reed gets real gray at times. The Thing, if he has your back's covered. Monk is the same way. Monk's a dangerous guy. He's not necessarily friendly. I'm not even sure he's likable for the people who know. But if he has your back,
Yeah.
you're okay. You're going to be okay. He will not ever hurt the innocent. And there's a little bit of Ben Grimm in him for sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, it's that idea that the tattoos are speaking through him to him. I was looking up some stuff for this episode and preparing is the skin ego. It's this kind of theory, Dieter and Zui, and suggests that the skin serves as a metaphorical container for the ego and provides a sense of boundary and containment for psychic content. The skin ego is like the physical skin, and it's the boundary that separates the individual from the external world and also holds the psychic apparatus together, body boundaries, reflecting kind of psychological boundaries. So it was been digging around. I was trying to make the science of Monk work a little bit. So
Yeah, actually, I need to find that thing you were talking about. I need to read that. It sounds like it's really the right thing for me, because if we're going to be pitching Monk for film or TV, I want to be able to build a pitch that really digs deep into the psychology of it. Most people don't know this, but Vin Diesel's an actually really well-read individual.
Oh yeah.
He also always played types of characters. Unlike Johnny Bernthal played the Punisher, two of them look like together, based on some of the characters they played, looks like together they collectively have the IQ of about 60.
Yes.
But in reality, really good, down-to-earth, nice guys. Some of the press isn't always, I think the press defines them by their characters more than by them. But
Vin Diesel, before the Fast series, he was in Boiler Room, which I thought was just an incredible movie where it wasn't muscle and brawn. It was a thinking movie, I guess, if we're going to classify guys versus, but that was some of his early stuff before he got into the action and he found his stride. And I think that happens. Like, he's a beefy dude and he plays those roles really well.
Right.
But
I think it's hilarious that he's a D&D dungeon master, though.
Yep.
oh, yeah.
And he's a giant nerd.
Oh, wow.
Actually has a cloak with a hood.
Yep.
Wow.
Wow.
I've read that.
He's one, and Henry Cavill's one too. And you got these two guys who they're defined a lot by their ability to punch things, yet they're both book nerds, fantasy nerds, pop culture nerds. Makes me like them a lot more.
I think that's perfect for playing Monk because he is such a tough guy, but is introspective, and do you know what I mean? So that just
And Monk is trying to find. I have a long game with the character of Monk. He's trying to find his way to the fire zone, which is referenced in a couple of different works, and it's a book I will be actually writing called The Fire Zone that kind of ties together. But he wants peace, but he's done so much harm in his life. As a first, not asking questions who he has to shoot when he was wearing a uniform, and asking even fewer questions when he was a private military contractor. He has, to quote Black Widow, a lot of red in his ledger, and that isn't usually done by doing pretty stuff. But also, he's good at it, and he knows he's good at it, and there's a burden there, too. When somebody is good at something, even if it's something that hurts them, but it benefits other people, hard to lay down your sword and shield on that one.
Yeah, no.
now, Monk also, it's not just about getting the tattoos and having the ghosts, it's also what's it's the actual blood, right?
Blood is mixed with holy water and tattoo ink to create these tattoos. And his best friend, Patty Cakes, is the tattoo artist, was her daughter that was murdered, and that was his first
Right.
first of the tattoos. It's
I think only one of it, because I've heard you talk about this. You do not have a tattoo, Jonathan. Is that right? Or do you? Okay, yeah. You're like me. I don't have one yet either.
We're less than a month away from me being a grandfather.
Oh, congratulations!
Oh,
wow.
congrats.
Yes,
My
yes.
son and his fiance are expected, and the baby's going to be named Orion.
Oh,
Okay.
nice.
Yeah.
So after the baby's born and healthy, and mama's healthy and everything else, Sam, my son, and I are going to go out and get Orion constellation tattoos.
Awesome.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
very cool.
Honestly, it just feels like a cat scratch.
So I was gonna say Nick has.
I have multiple. Yeah. Oh, you got that thick skin right here.
Oh boy. Hey, you know.
It's been punctured enough that I used to be a bodyguard, so I had been stabbed with ice picks, screwdrivers, knives, chopped in the shoulder with a meat cleaver.
Oh,
And so,
Yeesh. Yeah.
so I have, my skin is not impervious. I wish it was.
But if it was, you wouldn't get medical treatment. That's always in it. You brought that up earlier. That how do you get treated if you need someone needs to go inside of you to fix something? That's
I think that's a missed opportunity for Marvel to do a TV series about
Yeah.
damage control, and they had the night nurse.
Mhm.
I think a clinic for superheroes would be
That's
great.
Yeah.
the Luke Cage.
Caged.
They were trying to.
Netflix got shot with the bullet that
Right.
had the kind of exploding
Right.
drill tip,
And then she was trying to get.
she took them back to the original
Right.
lab and
Yeah.
cooked them in there was like the whole clam. And it's interesting because mollusks, actually there are mollusks that have iron kind of formation in their foot, so they can scrape algae off of the rocks. And for those out there, mollusks are like octopuses, cuttlefish, clams. Those are classified as mollusks. And they have shelled mollusks. They have a foot that can come out and they can do work. And so that's one. And then there's another mollusk that has like teeth, like kind of iron teeth to crack shells and things like that. So there are some real world. And so that was the idea there. That's when the show, they played on that. That's what was in the soup, and they were going to heat them up, and then that would loosen the structure, the molecular structure, which a lot of hand wavy. So I was like, oh, how does this work? But yeah, they did cover that
At
a little
least
bit.
they,
that she
they
tried
at
to-
least tried to.
They did
cover
try. I
it.
mean, they made an attempt to explain it.
Yeah. They used the night nurse character for getting her Claire.
Mhm.
They used Claire as
Yep.
as the go-to person for Daredevil and
That's
so
right,
on.
yeah.
I would love to have seen that become a secret department within the hospital
Yeah.
she worked at. I might pitch it to Marvel. And see if
Yeah.
I like
I have
that.
a couple doctor friends. We could some people who would advise me. So
Yeah.
Oh, that would be a really cool, like, just medical
Would be,
series.
Yes. Yeah. If you're looking for a writer, then happy to write something for you.
You know,
Nonetheless, the other thing I was going to say about the tattoos, and another thing I was looking up was all of the kind of dermal sensors. I didn't really know a lot about that, so I was looking it up. But the MIT had a project where they were using biosensitive inks in there that was reactive to glucose, pH, sodium, kind of to monitor health. And so this tattoo ink was actually biosensored. And so you
Right.
have this kind of
they're working
connection.
on diabetics to be able
Yep.
to like literally flash a little warning
Yep.
when
Yep.
things like that.
Yep.
Cancer sensors, other things. And also one of the things they've been talking about, I don't know if they've gotten there quite yet, is an implant that will sense the onset of seizures of one kind or another and then transmit immediately to 911 or to the contact person for care. It's a great idea. And that's the kind of body mods I'm okay with. I'm not a big
Right.
fan of body for the most part, but that one, those sort of
Right.
things, when science is used for the right
Yeah.
thing, right.
Yeah.
One of my upcoming Joe Ledger novels is going to deal with cybernetics and all
Yeah.
of its different good and bad phases. And I started
Mhm.
doing some research, and man, it's amazing what's under R&D right now.
Yeah.
And it's freaky that we're so much further along than I thought we were.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff is there. It's just a matter of getting the right funding, right grants, and getting it past people who don't want that kind of thing attached to them. They'll fret with going out and getting a barcode or QR code
Right.
tattooed on them, but nothing that's not
Yeah.
stylish, but it's their health.
Yeah, I think so at the University of Chicago, where I do research at and work, I'm part of the Cube, which is a quantum NSF funded facility where they're trying to develop quantum sensors for biological applications like that. And so so I was just in a meeting because I'm a biologist. So I go and try to interface with the physicists and chemists, talk about applications. So that's where I come in. I know enough to talk about qubits and how entanglement works, but that is not my expertise. But and going over how these sensors can work to report information out is super important. So yeah, it's a fascinating as I got into that and hear about some of the things, because it's like, how do we get this thing that works in cells on a petri dish now into a body, or what's the mechanism? And it's, so you're right. It is some of the stuff that's in sci-fi and it's now making its way. And it's like, that's more real than you think.
Science fiction has always been, one of the reasons they called it speculative fiction. It's a lot of people looking forward. The cell phones were clearly inspired by the communicators on Star Trek.
Yep.
But we do much more now. Cell phones, it's like the communicator, the tricorder, about 15 other things in our phone now, but that's where the idea came from for its structure. And a lot of other things. Well, I grew up reading the reprints, the band of reprints of the old Doc Savage novels. Man of Bronze, if you ever read any of those.
I haven't.
Published 175 of them, published in the 30s and 40s. And he always had advanced technology that he developed. And a lot of it's stuff we have now.
Wow. Yeah.
Contact lenses, answering machines, planes. This is 1934, planes that flew 500 miles an hour. Have that. So many of the things that Lester Dent, who wrote most of the novels, put in the stories were things that people were just saying, wouldn't it be cool if? Writers threw that stuff into fiction, and some of the people reading that fiction grew up to be scientists.
Yes, that's the way it works sometimes.
Yeah. One of my best friends, Ronald Coleman, who's now actually a ongoing character in my Joe Ledger stories, but he's a molecular biologist, stem cell scientist. And I'm constantly talking to him about, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? And sometimes he's like, yeah, we did that in 1970. Yeah. We're all come up with, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? Would this even be possible? He's like, not yet, but by the time the book is out, because I keep working on grants for that. I love science, and I love the fact that it keeps moving forward. What I don't like is that there are groups that are taking this science, and of course, the biggest funding is for DARPA and things like that, the military research.
Yeah.
I've talked to those guys a bunch of times, and some scary nerds.
Right.
The best kind, scary nerds. So I do have a question, Joe.
Yes.
How likely is it to have skin like the Thing? Because I know there is that syndrome where that guy had the tree skin.
Your skin can calcification of skin. I'm trying to think of the disorders like FAP, FOP, or something like that.
Something around.
Yeah, and so you just have this kind of all your fibrous tissues begin to calcify and overcalcify into bony structures. The problem with that, you'd have to make this next leap because, as we talked about earlier, how do you make that flexible, right? Because those folks usually are they become very stiff in their structure and rigid. So you need to now, how do you make that? So almost it can't be an internal structure. It has to be external in terms of the way you would form it. So that would have to be either a new fourth skin layer is created that would then give you this extra properties, and or your dermis would now excrete some material, either one of these iron sulfide kind of compounds, or could be even calcified. We talked about diatoms in, I think, the plant episode. And so where they produce silicate or coral, they produce calcium kind of deposits. So there are organisms that do excrete these materials, and you could have these snails. That's right. Snail shells. Right. So there are these biomaterials. Your teeth is a biomaterial, right? And so there's a lot of folks working on that. I know some of those folks, and it's fascinating because the interface between biology and this biomaterial is unique and difficult to reproduce. That's why you go in for dental work or implants, they don't stay all the time, or it's an interesting field there. But yeah.
One of the conceits within comics, though, on that topic, though, is that when they never considered that a lot of these mutations would be detrimental to health. I mean, the thing with its skin, the way it is, he would be a patient in a hospital somewhere.
Yes.
He would be walking around and punching the hole.
Yes. Well, we talked about the cosmic rays in themselves would be pretty damaging. So you would have to be a mutant already to tolerate the cosmic rays from not just being a cancer patient. You're right. He would be instead of tough skin, it would just have tumors all over him and a ruined thyroid, because he's been, you're now been devastated by cosmic rays, unshielded and exposed to cosmic rays, which, so yeah, you're right about that. Yeah.
Well, it does create an opening, though, for stories to be told that would explain it. And just like there have been a lot of folks that come along and tried to explain the physics of Star Trek or Star
Mhm.
Wars and so
Right.
on, the physics of Superman. There are plenty of books out there where scientists like yourself are trying to say, okay, if that is
Right.
real,
That's right.
then how?
Right.
I played with this actually, not on the skin subject, but I did a book called Zombie CSU where I interviewed a couple hundred people in the real world about what would happen if zombies were real. If zombies were here, inarguably
Yep.
here, I would be research, react, respond, whatever, and talk to scientists, talk to all the different types of scientists, military, everyone else. Everyone has a theory,
Mhm.
but it would need to be a new. There would have to be. There's somebody have to throw a hell of a lot of money into research to finding out how these people are not dying
That's
as a
right.
result of
Yes.
these changes. And I think that opens up a lot of storytelling possibility for comics too. But I would love to do an anthology,
Yeah.
a prose anthology, where scientists write superhero stories that explain the superheroes.
Yeah.
I should
No.
pitch that.
Yeah. There you go. No.
No, a
That's
bunch
a-
of scientists, writers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's
Some
what-
in this room.
That's
here.
what we try to do in a podcast. And they could throw me that question. I know. Yeah. I do think, when you talk about some of those things, like you have other heroes, Colossus, who he puts the metal armor on, and you talk about your skin breathing. You have to take that off pretty quick. And, or is there some other mechanism that he's using to actually dissipate heat and things like that? So you do have these kind of, these characters who have these abilities, and then to form a metallic skin and then take it away also requires some level of rapid metabolism. And on the podcast, we always try to explain things in terms of how many Big Macs you have to eat to compensate for the caloric load of doing some of these modifications quickly.
Yeah, they deal with that in the Flash comics and stuff.
That's right. Yeah. But no one talks about the calories, so that's why.
You know, with Colossus, it would make a little more sense if instead of it just being steel, it was plates that under which air could get through
Yes,
and
right.
boundaries could happen and so on. But again, the comic book writers are not scientists.
Yeah.
We're in the 21st century. We're 25 years into the century. It's
Yes.
time to level up and let the nerds come out to play and make the comics make sense, which I think would bring in a whole group of readers,
Yes.
because a lot of people dismiss comics foolishly as saying that they're not literature, they're not good, but they are. They're
Mhm.
really great.
Absolutely.
Nice. You could use comics as a way to teach STEM
Yes.
courses.
I agree.
There's
Yep.
so much.
Yep.
There's a lot of good science there, but
Yep.
there's also what if science, and what if
Yep.
science is what drives science forward.
We talk
Right.
about zombies. That was how I got into. I always wanted to do science education and outreach, and I realized a lot of adults don't know anything about science. And I had a friend who was doing these art and science talks, and he approached me with this idea, and he said, "I'm doing these talks, but no one shows up to hear about these science lectures." And I was like, "Oh, so this was some years ago," and it's how I discovered you, because I said I'm a big zombie fan, and the science of zombies and how it works. So I started reading everyone that did zombie stuff and kind of where they're at, where's the literature at, all the movies. And so I pitched to my friend. I said, "Hey, we should do this art and science, the science of zombies." And he looks at me, and he uses sciences also. He goes, "But no one does research on zombies." And I go, "I know, but if you want people to show up, then talk about something that's super fun, and then we'll sneak science in on them." And I'm a cell biologist, so we'll do all cell biology and kind of talk. And we filled this art gallery up with people, standing room only. And he was like, "Wow, this really worked." And so now, as he does it, I think he's stopped or taken a pause, but every time he does it, he has some little hook like that now. And I'm like, "Yeah, let's keep it going." And so that was then how we arrived to this podcast, was at that idea. But that was the start of it. Zombies was the fun, and figuring out how you would get the infection event, and then what would happen after that in fast zombies.
You love fast zombies.
In my Dead at Night series, I worked with scientists to come up with a parasite-driven one.
Yeah.
Toxoplasma, green jewel wasp, a whole bunch of other things. And sometimes you can get a certain distance toward doability, toward actual realizing it. If you talk to the right scientists and get them to really put their minds to it, you get a lot further and closer to it
You do.
than is comfortable sometimes.
Yes.
But you're talking about
Right.
the art gallery thing. Here in San Diego, we have the Fleet Center, which is a science center attached to the astronomy center. And I was on a panel there. They had also been trying to do panels, and nobody was showing up to them. So because Comic-Con is in San Diego, they decided to start bringing in comics people to talk to scientists. The very first panel where I met the scientist I mentioned earlier, Dr. Ronald Coleman, it was Kevin Eastman, the artist who co-created Ninja Turtles, and
Mhm.
myself. We were with the creators. And then there was a virologist, who's sadly name I'm blanking on, Nancy something, I can't remember her last name, and Ronald Coleman, who's a stem cell scientist. And we were asking them questions, and they were asking us questions. The audience was asking questions. Kevin, the artist for the Ninja Turtles, he was like goo or whatever. So we needed a thing. We just called it that. For my viewers thing, I wanted it to be a genetic disorder that was latent. And as melting polar ice softened permafrost, all diseases were, and that's an idea I had before that actually started happening.
Oh boy.
I'm kind of impressed. I subscribed to some science newsletters, and I read an article back in 2010 about melting polar ice releasing old bacteria and possibly viruses. And I'm like, that's scary as hell. You read a book.
Right.
UV wars.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the zombies, the fun thing about zombies is each individual thing it does can be explained by nature. Like the fact that it has a low metabolism, so it doesn't rot as much. There are animals, the ground squirrel, I forget the name of the frog that freezes solid every year and then thaws without the tissue damage because of the way the sugar.
Yep.
That exists.
Yep.
If the motor cortex was working, or even on a minimal level, the zombie could walk, bite, chew, swallow. Without the motor cortex, it couldn't. Unless there's respiration, a zombie couldn't moan, and we know zombies moan.
Yes.
You can make an argument that zombies are not dead. They're not alive. They're living dead, a third state of existence based on a rate of metabolism so greatly reduced that they appear dead to the point where their outer tissues become necrotic, but they're still not actually dead. And,
I had thought in my own head, and we're getting off when we get back to skin, because we're going to have to close the episode in a little bit. But yeah, I had a dual infection event. One of the mind, but also people forget about the second brain, and that's our gut, which is just filled with bacteria. So as our control systems, entropy starts to take over, then that would be your driving force. And those bacteria then would have some preservation of self, especially if the brain was now infected by something else. It might not have as tight of control over the system. So you can then have this dual function. That also explains why in movies, you have this, not everyone's infected by a splatter of blood or something like that, because you need both parts to become infected. And so you could be primed, and then once you're primed and maybe you have a death event, and now the brain parasite can take over, and then the gut ones can now go, oh, you know what? There's no more control. Everything's leaky gut syndrome. We can get in there. We can now invade. And we can have this kind of two brain system in control. And hence why your movements are shambling and things like that. Not necessarily because your coordination is bad, but because you have two competing entities inside one body. But that's another episode, another rabbit hole. But
I'd like to go back on that one.
You're in.
So I do want to touch on my fun fact list. I promise a list, and I'd like to deliver. But there's a website, maybe you're familiar with it. I just learned about it. It's called Bio Numbers, and it's this fun website. At least I think it's fun, where you can search for different topics and it will give you these kind of biology relevant numbers. And so how many proteins are inside of a cell, or so I put in about skin, and then it has the paper reference, which then I clicked on links because that's what I do. So it was just fun. It saved me some time on this. Weight of skin on average is about 9 pounds or 4.1 kilograms for the folks who want to go to metric. The number of skin cells, about 1 billion on average. Number of bacteria in skin, about 1 trillion. So that's a lot of bacteria, which we didn't even talk about. The skin kind of, how it bends skin, the bacterial that keeps, that are very helpful and beneficial. How are they living? How are they getting along?
Do you think he has to moisturize?
What if he gets a fungal infection, like ringworm,
Right.
underneath those rocks?
Yeah,
Like
like
that?
what kind of lotion does he
The
use?
athlete's foot there.
Because the storage. Made some right that storage.
Yeah.
I just
Can they help me
assume the
with the
Human Torch is
athlete's
just,
feet?
hey, I'll get that. Hold on.
90% of the human body is covered in hair. I didn't realize that, but that was
How much? 90%?
90%. So
Is
the
that
density of prokaryotes, so prokaryotes are bacteria, so these are organisms without a nucleus, versus eukaryotes, which our cells are eukaryotic. The density of prokaryotes on the skin of humans, and this is cells per centimeter squared, it's about 1,000 to 10,000, and you're growing. And under your arm, it's about 1 million per centimeter squared, or it's about 0.78 inches squared for those who think in inches. So that was
And this all
interesting
came
number.
from that one website.
This came from this one website. The turnover
Wow.
of cells in your entire epidermis is about 26 to 27 days. So you got, so
Really?
yeah, so you, yeah, so all that dry, dead skin you're generating, that's your dander. So that's another for Ben. How's he dealing with that?
I thought it would
And-
just be rock
Yeah,
dust.
No, that's right, Gus, that's right.
I wish that when skin regenerated, it would take scars away. Because I got
Yeah, so those are some fun. And then the concentration of microbes in human gut, that one was there. And that's in the tens of billions of cells. And number of human cells, because this was something I always think about. Are we more bacteria than human? But the total number of human cells in your body is about 10 to 30 trillion. So you got about hundreds of billions of bacteria on you, in you, but you still are a little more human, just
Slightly more human than bacteria.
Yes.
I don't think are quite human, but
Yeah, that's right. So there you go. There's some
There's more
fun.
bacteria.
Those are some fun skin facts and others. But yeah, bio numbers. I can.
Oh, I'm definitely going to
Yeah,
get them out. I
yeah,
wrote it down.
Yeah, it's a fun. And when I learned of it, I was in a lecture. And someone had these cool numbers, and I went, I was like, "How do you get these? Did you just guess at this stuff?" And they were like, "No, there's this website, bio numbers." And the first thing I did when I got back to my office, bio numbers.
I love that there is nerd porn for scientists.
It exists. Like we keep it secret. It's our own little secret.
Nerd porn for writers is the TV Tropes website. Have you ever been to TV Tropes?
Oh.
That all of the tropes of everything.
Everything in there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Lose days on it.
Wow.
So much of my stuff's on there, and somebody said, "Oh, I saw you on TV Tropes." Like, it was TV Tropes. When there's a whole bunch of my stuff, they're breaking down which tropes and which variations of tropes are used, and so on. But I love the bio numbers. That's fun. I gotta grab it. Because sometimes when a scientist in a story wants to, as Bob, that sort of thing, when they're info about the moment, you do want the details. My science guy I normally go to, he actually does work a day job, but so I have to catch him when he's available.
Yeah, well, there you go. You can have some numbers to throw out there, and the paper references, so you can look it up and see where to get the numbers, because it was interesting. So there was a lot of cool things in there, but yeah, there you go. Yeah, so
I know we've just about run out of time, but was there another topic on skin that we need to go back to that we didn't cover?
do you guys, unless you have something you want to,
Please.
Yeah.
I have a whole list of
mentioned the
stuff.
Human
We
Torch.
have another.
Yeah, you mentioned Human Torch, right?
Yep.
How the hell does he not dehydrate? Like
That's
completely?
right. So we
Right.
will we're going to do an episode on all the Fantastic Fours. So we actually are going to have Dr. David Pincus from University of Chicago on for that episode. And so he joined us for actually the permafrost episode, which was one of the funniest episodes. But yeah, he kind of studies the impact of environmental changes on organisms, short term and long term. And one of the things is heat stress and heat shock. So I think
So that'll be a great question for.
It would be. Yeah. We'll pose that
Also,
to
Iceman too.
Iceman.
Yeah.
That's right. No, Iceman.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So how does he live in that ice state? That's another episode, I think.
And
We'll have
moving
to-
those arms with ice on them.
Yeah, cracking. Yes. How's he stay flexible?
I
Yeah.
just have this idea
Yeah.
that somewhere there's a darker lab where a couple of guys are trying to figure out how to make the Fantastic Four.
That's right. Yes.
I'm in.
Like that.
And cosmic rays is not the answer. I'm going to go right there.
Yeah.
That's
We can't roll that out yet, Joe. I will.
Actually, it's one of the fun things. You guys have seen Night of the Living Dead, right? The
yes.
original.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
One of the conceits there is that the major theory in the first film is that radiation from a returning space probe. George Romero was a huge fan of the Fantastic Four, and that was his nod to the cosmic
Interesting.
ray.
Wow.
Though one space probe returning does not explain
Yes.
global. I busted George a lot on this
Yeah.
because
Night of the Living Dead, was it truly global or was it local, just in
Yeah, it was
Western
global.
Pennsylvania? Because was that
He-
clear
he
or?
wanted it to be global because people were
Right.
talking about it in Washington and other places.
Okay. Yeah. It
But
might have been in the
second
radio.
film,
Yeah.
Clearly it was. But the
Yeah.
first one, he actually expected it to be defeated. It
Right,
was never
right,
intended to be a story.
right.
But he immediately decided to go further with it. His next film actually explored another aspect of it, the crazies.
That's right.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
love the crazies.
love the
Yes.
cra-
Basically, the
Crazies.
first rage virus story.
that's right.
That we wouldn't have 28 days later.
That's right. No, that's
He
exactly
invented
right.
football genres.
Yes, the
But,
crazies was it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I actually wrote dead of night because I wanted to, as like a thank you note to George
Yeah.
Romero. Hell, he and I became friends, actually. He read the book and loved it, and we became friends. We did an anthology together. But I couldn't stand that the science made no sense in the book, in the movie. I'm 10 years old, it bugged me.
Right.
Yes.
The Fantastic Four thing, the Thing, his skin, the Hulk, his mass, Reed
Yes.
Richards, every bodily function when he's stretching.
That's right. We're going to have a MD on to Maria Lau at Northwestern University. Is going to be on that episode. So yeah, we're going to get into a little bit more science. So the first was it Sue? We had a comic critic and review to open up the series, and now we have you, Jonathan, on skin, and then we have a couple scientists and an MD coming in to round out the Fantastic Four. So yeah, so we'll have to,
following each other. So just speaking to my nerdvana.
I know.
Science for weirdos.
Science for weirdos is what someone told me. We were out and someone said, "Oh, you do that podcast?" And they go, "Yeah, it's like I've been listening to it. It's like Science for Weirdos, and that's my thing." And I'm like, "Oh, I kind of like that."
I think that is dead on.
Yeah, it's been
Love it.
a great conversation, and
Thank you so much for joining
You
us.
want to go ahead and
Plugs?
anything? You have some new stuff coming out, I know for sure. So it's.
I got a lot of stuff. I always have a lot of stuff.
I saw your last post that you were out of words.
Yeah,
It said your brain was out of words. Yeah.
it was, but I've already started the next novel. I'm writing my 55th novel now.
Congratulations.
Wow.
That's
Damn.
your inspiration to us young novelists.
I have a graphic novel coming out in June, Joe Ledger and Violin, Hearts and Minds, which is a comic original story is set in my Joe Ledger world. Crystal Lake is putting that out. And last year I had a really fun one, was Godzilla versus Cthulhu comic
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
or Command Games. But next up for me is the next Necrotech book,
Hmm.
Deep Space Lovecraftian Horror. And we are in discussions with an anime company in Japan right
Cool.
now, based on that series. Giant mech robots that are shapeshifting, piloted by the ghost of dead pilots.
Oh, damn.
Wow.
The book that I just finished the other day was the third in that series.
That's cool.
I love the fact I'm leaning more and more into science fiction these days. I've got 2 different science fiction series running now. And it's fun because, and this is one little thing I'll just throw in before I skedaddle, is that one of the reasons I love working with scientists, talking to experts in various fields for my books, there's an old con man saying, use 9 truths to sell 1 lie.
Hmm.
That really applies great to any kind of fiction, because if you can build your fiction on a structure of plausibility, it makes it so much easier for suspension of disbelief, and also the trust when they know you're stepping off the top of that scaffold into fiction. They know that you've done your homework, so the fiction is going to be a reasonable extension of the nonfiction, and they'll go with you for that. But if you're just making shit up so that you can
Yes.
tell a science fiction story, there's no structural basis to it. You're only going to get the people who don't know science,
right.
and that's an increasingly small number. I hope, because there's a lot of anti-science going on.
Yes.
But-
Great.
Fingers crossed. There are still people who want it to believe in it. They want to believe that we can have superheroes. They want to believe that people can do this, that people will become stronger, that maybe somehow we'll be able to survive a polluted planet and get wise enough to fix the planet. So I love doing that. I love working with scientists. It's fun. It's so much fun for me to be on a podcast with people who understand science.
Awesome.
Thank
you for coming on. Yeah.
And us.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Nerds get it by extension. I'm not a scientist either, but all my science-addicted friends, we all love the fact that there's real scientists out there, and that so
Right.
many scientists are actually in the nerd community.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
And I want, Jonathan, you didn't mention it, but we have I'm sure there's some writer friends that listen, but you do a great masterclass series. And so on different topics in the writing, both writing, the art of writing, but also the business side of writing. And I've attended several of them. And
they're fundraisers.
yeah, and they're also fundraisers, right? The money goes to the No Kill Shelter or the
There are animal shelters, women's shelters, homeless shelters, and these are programs that provide meals for children
Yeah.
in areas where they're not getting it, families don't have enough income, and 50 cents can buy a whole meal. I do 100% of the money from my workshops goes there. It does a lot of good, and also I hope people can use the material to get into the writing business because it's more fun when there are more kids in the playground.
Yeah, definitely. No. So check it out, you writers out there.
One last question for you, if you don't mind. Who is your favorite unbreakable skin character?
Oh.
Oh, the Hulk. Oh, sorry. Sorry, the Thing has always been my favorite unbreakable character because of the fact that he's the Hulk I liked, but the Hulk was Jekyll and Hyde with dipped in green. It's that. But the Thing, he was always leaning into his humanism, an empathetic character. And when you have a character who looks like basically a big rock monster, but empathy is his truest super strength, man, I gotta love a character like that.
I'm so glad we have you on this episode because he's your favorite.
And the very first comic I ever bought has him on the cover of it. 466. Hard to believe that's 1967. Good Lord.
Yeah, that's it. Awesome. Thanks again for joining us. It was a lot of fun and just a lot of cool nerding out in pop culture.
Very much.
And thanks for inviting me on too. I had a lot of fun. I wish I had a little time right now, but hope you guys will invite me back because I'll definitely.
We will do. Yeah.
Oh,
no,
yeah.
definitely. No, you already brought up several topics that we'll have to have you on now for, and you know.
Wait, are you going to be the fourth rabbit in the hole?
That's right.
And also, with one of my upcoming classes, we haven't set the date yet, but my molecular biologist friend is going to co-teach a class with me
cool.
on work with experts.
Cool. That'd be awesome.
That'd be a lot of fun too.
Yeah.
Because a lot of writers don't know how to ask the right questions, and they don't know how to follow it down that rabbit hole into a plausible story. And having a scientist on there would be fun. And if I'll give you a free pass of that one, Josie, you can join the conversation.
That'd be
with us.
fun. Yeah. No.
And also the other way too, scientists don't always know how to translate.
That's right.
their
Yeah. Science communication is big. Right. Yes. Right. Yeah. And explain
So they can
ideas.
use writer, or they can use someone
The
that
Science just did a piece, and I was interviewed for it was like speculative fiction, in how speculative fiction and bench science kind of merge, and so they had it came out last month. I can send you a link to it. Yeah, it was fun. It was a few of us in it.
I want to get that and read it. I need to renew my subscription to the Scientist.
No, it was a fun article and had a couple quotes in there, so I was happy that something came out of my interview.
I might be happy with some information too. Do you want one in something?
Anytime. I've helped other people or tried to help. Because sometimes people, you're right, they call and then they're like, I want to do this thing with this equipment. And I'm like, you can't do that thing with that equipment. Or there's practical reasons why. You won't get the image you think you'll get. It'll charge. It'll look bad. And they go, if I can't do it with that piece of equipment, then my story fails. And I'm like, we need to, let's have a longer conversation and figure this out. And we did. It was like, you need this piece of equipment. But they're like, but that's not in that room. And I'm like, well, you need to have this scene happen in this room.
In a different room.
So it's fun.
I've actually had to replot the whole novel because I talked to a scientist and found out that my assumption, like writers, we have a lot of information in our head. Doesn't mean we're experts on it, but it's enough to get us into trouble or hopefully to ask the right questions. And I had this really great idea for something, and I asked a couple people who were into nuclear science, power plants and so on. My idea made no sense. It was laughably. It's like, shit. Glad I didn't write the book because my editor didn't know that it was a bad idea.
Right.
Working with scientists, big important thing.
Yeah, no, and experts and things like that. No, it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm the expert that a lot of my friends have for martial
arts. I know. Yeah, that's awesome. I have a friend. I don't know if he joined the last one. I told him he should get on, but I know he has a lot of action and fighting scenes, and he did wrestling and jiu-jitsu. So I was like, oh, he should jump on because Jonathan, that's his background, especially writing those scenes and getting it across.
Now.
Yeah. Cool. I know you need to run, and so
stuff. So thanks.
Yeah.
You guys
I know. Yeah.
I'm like, hey,
We will do.
Happy to come back and nerd out with you guys again.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Anytime.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Guys.
Cheers.
Thank you.
And you have me, Joe.
You got Nick.
We've got Georgia. And we've
gone down some holes.
Some tough skin holes.
Bye-bye.
Stay strong.